Hello and welcome to the Sector One Motorsport podcast in partnership with Formula Careers. Now, on today's episode, I am joined by a man who has worked in Formula One marketing and sponsorship for 19 years. He runs the Motormouth podcast and he's the head of WTF1 Talent and WTF1. I would argue that he's one of motorsport's most connected people. Please welcome Tim Silvey. Tim, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Very nice introduction.
Now, I know I've given you a bit of an introduction there, but it's always great to hear it in your own words. Tim, who are you?
I'm a dad and husband, and I live in Bedfordshire. Spend a lot of time in London and various other places dotted around the world. And I do, as you said, I do various things. I work with the guys at the race media, so do a lot of work with the race from a commercial perspective, and run the talent business, which we launched just over a year ago, which, as you rightly say, is now WTF Talent, not WTF1 Talent. The reasons for that we can probably get into. Head up WTF1. And that's sort of the revamp of that brand, and lots of other things along the way, from race and driver management to podcasting and a podcast production company, and lots of sponsorship and broking deals in Formula One with various entities.
So you're clearly a very busy man, but I want to go all the way back forward first. Let's pause on that. When did motorsport enter your life and how did it become a passion and a love for you?
I mean, I probably, similar to a lot of people, I used to watch the F1 when it was on terrestrial TV, when we had very few, I think probably 4 or 5 channels at the time total. And we would always have it on in the background on a Sunday afternoon. We'd sit down and have a roast as a family and have the Grand Prix on in the background. And that's probably when I first noticed it. And I wasn't immediately drawn to it. It wasn't until much later, probably after university, actually, that I really got into it, because I got a job for a sports marketing agency when I quit university, didn't finish. And that's where I was introduced to Formula One properly and started going to races and experiencing it, and sort of fell in love with the sport. I mean, I'm not a hardcore enthusiast, but I am a hardcore enthusiast of the business of Formula One. That's what really interests me. Although obviously I do keep a close eye on the racing.
I was going to ask, how did you always feel like a job in motorsport was attainable? But I guess it kind of fell into your lap because you were just doing sport in general.
Yeah, I mean, the sports marketing agency, we did, it was 80-90% Formula One, a bit of WEC, some athletics and golf, but the main focus was Formula One. The client, their major client back then was Panasonic, who used to sponsor Toyota. So that was what I worked on initially back in 2005-ish. And then from there went on to ING Bank, who sponsored Renault and loads of other brands in between, and then eventually ended up in the Middle East working at Yas Marina Circuit. But it all sort of just escalated from there, and worked with more and more brands and more rights holders, and sort of gradually, yeah. But you're right, I fell into it more so than finding it, so a slightly less traditional route than some.
And you spoke about how you left university. Now, what happened there? Why did that end up happening? Was it just the right thing for you, really?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go to university. Unfortunately, I wasn't great at school or college, so didn't come out of college with any great A levels or anything like that. I did a GNVQ. I don't know if that's still a thing, and that meant that I had to go through clearing after a gap year of traveling. And the only university I could get into was not a fantastic one, and it wasn't the proper university experience. So I did my industry year, where they pack you off to a company to get experience for a year as part of the course, and did that in Florida, in the States, and just loved having been a person who was not suited to the British education system. I found that I was suited to work, and earning money was much more appealing to me at that stage than my education, rightly or wrongly. So I quit university early and went straight into work in London, and then and yeah, never looked back really. That was it for me from an education perspective.
So if someone was coming to you advice whether to go to university or not to get a similar job as you, would you say it doesn't really matter?
I'd say it helps now. I mean, I think if there weren't the astronomical fees associated with going to university, I would encourage everyone to go because I think it can. I think there is data out there that says if you've been to university and you've had a certain level of education, in the long run, you'll be a wealthier person. So if that's something that's important to you, then I would say probably go to university if you can afford to do it. But it's not the be all and end all. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday on my show called Lucy Owen, who works for Wasserman now, one of the biggest sports marketing companies around. And she did take that route. She went to university and studied sports management, and that certainly helped her get her foot in the door. For me, it was more building connections and networks that allowed me to progress through the ladder.
And what was it that made you want to go further into motorsports? Once you got your foot in the door with that, it kind of fell into your lap. What was it about it that made you want to stick with it?
At the time when I came into it in 2005, it was a very different place to what it is now. And it was pre-financial crash. There was free-flowing money in the paddock, and there weren't the budget constraints that there are these days. So for me at the time, the reason I stayed in it was because it was really fun. We were traveling to 15 or so races a year. We were staying in lovely hotels, eating in lovely restaurants with lovely clients who wanted to spend their money on these partnerships. So it was just really, really good fun. And it wasn't until probably 5 or 6 years later that post crash, that things became much more constrained in terms of finances and budgets to adhere to. Things became a little bit more strategic, and that's when I was like, I need to take this a bit more seriously now. And I thought, well, I've been in it for a few years. I know a few people. I'll stick around and see how this goes. I was enjoying it still, and yeah, and fast forward nearly 20 years, I'm still here.
So, with that job you're mentioning there, when you were having these lovely meals with lovely clients, can you talk us through what a day in the life would be like in a role like that?
I mean, in the office, it was prepping for the next race, and again, back then, sponsorship wasn't so much about digital social media. It was all about events and hospitality and experiential. So, we would spend our days planning the next big activity at a race, and whether that was a party or hospitality or an event or even, in the absence of social media, we would away from the events and hospitality side, we would be doing things like how do we make sure that if it's ING Bank and Renault, that we have a credit card with a Formula One car on it, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of planning those kind of activities and activations, and then we would disappear on a Monday night or Tuesday morning off to whatever racetrack we were headed to, and we'd spend the first 24, 48 hours packing tickets and trudging around places like Istanbul in the traffic, taking tickets to hotels and meeting people at restaurants and escorting people to events and Q&As with drivers and team events and parties and organizing parties and show cars and lighting, and yeah, it was all that sort of stuff. So it was just a constant roller coaster of travel and planning, and extremely long hours and hard work, but we all loved it.
You mentioned there about how in the early stages of your career, you didn't really need to worry about content, social media, any of that. So, what was it like when that did become a thing and having to adapt that into your role?
Well, I first experienced it. So after I left the agency in 2000, end of 2011, beginning 2012, after I did a stint in the Middle East, I got myself into racing driver management. So I managed drivers in one driver in Formula One, one in WEC, British touring cars, and so on. Actually, Jamie Chadwick was one of my first clients when she was racing with a guy called Paul Hollywood, who some people will have heard of, who's the celebrity baker. He's also a racing driver. So she was racing with him at Beach Dean Aston Martin. So we took her on as a client. And that's when we really first started diving into the digital side of things a bit more, and just starting to use social media to leverage their profiles. But it was the early days of it, really, because Jamie didn't have a footprint at that point at all. Ollie Webb didn't, who was another guy I was looking after. Max Chilton in Formula One didn't. We had to build a social media presence for them, which was all new for all of us. So that was when I first started realizing, and then after COVID, it just ramped up big time. And, during and after COVID, suddenly everyone was doing digital, and you had to because you couldn't get out of the house.
Managing drivers then, how do you even get interested in that role? Because I grew up and my kind of interests were YouTube, and I always used to think, imagine me being able to manage all of these talents, or, my favorite boy band at the time. That would be just incredible. But it was always one of those careers where I was like, I don't even know where to begin with that. So racing driver management, where do you even begin with that?
Well, again, I fell into it. So
Yeah.
I was consulting at various places, and then I got a call from a mate of mine called Bob Cunningham, who is in music management, and he was doing some consultancy with a company called Crown Talent, and they managed the careers of X Factor stars. They launched the careers of various big pop stars, and they worked with labels, and they had a connection to the Chiltons, and Graham Chilton, who's the dad, had Max and Tom as sons. Max was just going from GP2 into Formula One, and Tom was in British touring cars going into world touring cars. And they went to this music management company and said, we'd like to look at someone managing the boys. And they said, well, we manage music artists, we don't manage racing drivers. So Bob, who overheard this conversation, called me and said, perhaps you should come in for a chat. You're in this world. So I went in for a chat, and 24 hours later, I was managing Max Chilton. And it went on from there. I did that for about 6 years. And we took Jamie actually from a sports car racer. And I remember the conversations with her and her dad and her mum. And we were sitting there going, what do we do next? Do you stay in sports cars? Do we go for Le Mans? Or do we take the plunge and put you in a single seater? Which is what we decided to do. And me and Tom Gaymore, who's a Sky Sports commentator, he was our driver manager, driver coach. We sat down with Jamie and said, well, why don't we give it a go? Let's test in some F3s and see how we get on. And obviously she's gone on to do pretty well out of it.
Yeah, so what is it like seeing her do so incredibly well in all of these single seaters now when you were involved in the push to go into single seaters?
It's really nice. I mean, it was a bit of a shock at first because, we didn't know how she was going to get on, and she had to learn to adapt to single seaters after being in sports cars for so long. We were struggling around for budget and sponsors to try and fund her racing. It was all hand to mouth, and we had no idea really that she would go on to do what she's done. Although we did think at the time, this feels like an important moment because it's a young woman racing in a man's world, which it very much was at that point. This could be, game changing for her, and so it transpired. So yeah, she's doing fantastically well. It's great to see.
And you obviously mentioned the former F1 driver Max Chilton being your first client. Obviously, you were already working in Formula One, so you kind of knew the chaoticness of it. Was it still daunting at all with that being your first major client?
Yeah, it was, in the sense that Max is he's obviously a very good racing driver. You have to be in Formula One, and he was driving for Marussia, which is not a great team, so he was never going to be competing up the front. But equally, it was the first time I'd been exposed to a Formula One driver that I was going to be working with, all the time. I'd worked with F1 drivers before that, but it was for Q&As and stuff at sponsorship events. I didn't have to get to know them, so it's quite intimidating, being a young guy who was suddenly an F1 driver manager, and having to learn all the legalities and fundraising and investment, and the pressures of getting sponsorship deals, and being at their beck and call 24/7. So it was certainly a baptism of fire.
So looking at the sponsorship work you've done, I read on your LinkedIn you've done stuff with brands like Hilton with McLaren, Epson with Mercedes. What are the key elements of making a partnership like these so successful? What is going through your head when you're looking at these kind of things?
It depends on what the brand wants to do with their messaging. It's whether it's a pure amplification play and they just want to make a lot of noise and point people towards their brand, or if it's B2B or B2C sales, or it depends what their objective and narrative is. And then you just adapt accordingly and take the assets that you get from the rights holder, i.e. the race team. You get your package, you pay your money, you get your package, you get your assets, whether that's driver time or team principal time, or tickets to a race or paddock club, or digital assets, whatever it might be. It's taking those assets, packaging them up, and then coming up with creative marketing and communications to fulfill whatever objectives that brand might have. So it's really case by case, and it depends on whether it's a B2B or a B2C brand. Obviously, how you apply those assets, and what you do with them. And sometimes you get it right, and sometimes you don't. But it's a hard life, that that sort of agency life where you're constantly on the hook to produce. And leverage and make the most of those assets that a brand has paid millions and millions of dollars for.
So when you do have one of those bad days when things don't go wrong, you personally, how do you motivate yourself, pick yourself back up to carry on?
I don't know. I mean, I'm a annoyingly positive person, so it takes quite a lot to beat me down. And I've had some very dark times where things have gone wrong. Even whether it's working for an agency or in my own business endeavors, that I do on my own. There's various ups and downs, but I've fortunately, I think my dad's side of the family in particular have been blessed with a bit of a positive gene, and it would take something fairly significant to pin me down for too long. And if I run into trouble, I just have to double my efforts to make sure that I get out of it and it doesn't happen again.
Let's move on and talk a little bit about your podcast then, the Motor Mouth podcast. How did that come to life?
That came to life because in 2019-ish, I built with a guy called Frank Smazier a motorsport app. We had this idea to build like the Facebook of motorsport. So we built an app, and in order to push people towards the app, we thought, let's come up with a way to market it without a big budget. So we thought, let's try podcasting and use that as a way to push people towards the app. That was literally our thinking, naive thinking, oh, people will listen to us, we'll tell them we've got an app, you go and have a listen. And it transpired that over time the podcast became the main thing. The app became almost redundant, and we shut down the app and focused on the podcast. And I think we were at something like 200 and something episodes now, and it's just been great. I mean, it's turned into its own entity that makes money through advertising and sponsors. And I get to talk to really interesting people all the time, every week. And it's probably that podcast that's giving me the black book that I've now got, because the people we've had on it, you tend to stay in touch with, and some of them are quite successful or very high profile. And a conversation offline with them often leads to something else and something else. And then you find yourself looking through your phone book going, God, this podcast, outside of being something that generates revenue, is actually given me a network of people that's become really useful.
Well, I was talking to Matt Bishop the other day, and he was saying a similar thing about, looking through his WhatsApp now, you've got people like Kevin Magnussen, Emerson Fittipaldi, and how it's quite a full circle moment from going to enjoying watching racing to having these kind of people in your phone. Do you have a similar thing where you see the people and you're like, oh my goodness, they're quite someone?
Yeah, I do. I mean, weirdly, I texted Emerson Fittipaldi about an hour ago because we're doing an auction and I want some stuff from him. So yeah, it's weird. It is weird, and but at the end of the day, that on the whole, they're all very nice, normal people. So it's not weird anymore. The weirdest times for me, in terms of like, oh my God moments, is when you do something where Lewis Hamilton walks into the room to help you or to deliver some sort of sponsorship thing that you need him to do, and that happened. I think that was the most sort of weird moment for me. I was at the Mercedes factory with Epsom, who were sponsored Mercedes, and we were doing some video work with Valtteri and Lewis. And Valtteri's just a nice bloke, dead easy. He's like your mate, you can just chat to him. He's he's a big celebrity, he's a big star, but he's not intimidating. Yeah. Lewis walked in and I was like, whoa, that was when I was like, this feels big, and he feels big, he's got presence.
Oh, I love that. That's honestly one of my favorite things about motorsport, is that it's so full circle in terms of the people you watch on the TV can be your colleagues in a few years' time, yeah, or working alongside you. Now, this might be a difficult one, but looking at the Motormouth podcast, you have such incredible guests that you managed to get yourself on there. Have you got a favourite?
Gunter Steiner was probably one of my favorites, not because he was sweary or the guy that you see on TV. It was the pre and post recording that I liked, because he stayed and asked loads of questions from me and Harry, and wanted to chat and find out, what we did and how we got here. And we spoke for a long time with him. And every time I've worked with him a couple of times, he's always lovely and he was good value. Rosberg was interesting, just to hear about his, confidence issues that he had when he was up against Lewis Hamilton in 2016 and winning the world championship and all that sort of stuff. But there's been so many interesting ones. Charlie Martin was fascinating. Her story's nuts, and yeah, hearing how she's gone through the change, become a woman, and gone on to be a better racing driver than she was as a man. All that sort of stuff is fascinating. Willie T. Ribbs, he was brilliant, talking to him about racing against Nigel Mansell and, being a black driver, being suppressed in IndyCar and, experiencing what he did in terms of racism, but also hearing his stories about the people he's raced. Emerson Fittipaldi. There are so many, and they've all got great stories. I've always said I want to write a book someday, because there's so much content we've got now that would be, there's insights everywhere. I think probably going to start. Gerhard Berger, he was good. He was very funny.
Yeah.
Great stories about Senna again. I don't know. It's very difficult to pick.
We could probably sit here all day and you can reel off names and incredible stories you've had with them all.
Yeah. But it's just nice. It's just nice to meet these people and talk to them and understand a bit more about them beyond what you hear in the press.
Amazing. Well, let's move on and talk a little bit about the work you do with WTF1. So you're the head of WTF1 and the head of WTF Talent. Oh my goodness, it's so hard not to put the one at the end.
I know.
So what exactly does it mean if you're the head? What does that entail?
So with WTF1, it's a funny one. Obviously, Matt and Tommy left a while ago now, and we had to reinvent it. I joined just after the new presenters came along, and for one reason or another, didn't necessarily work out as everyone expected, and things have morphed and changed over the course of many months. A lot of the people who were involved with WTF1, even back to the Matt and Tommy days, are still there. In different positions, just working on different stuff, whether it's social or whatever. But now it's become much more of a socially led platform rather than focusing on long form on YouTube, which I'm sure people have noticed. It's still super strong on Instagram and TikTok and Threads and all that stuff. It's doing really well. And my role there is just to oversee the brand. There's a guy called Duncan Anderson, who's an absolute wizard of a social guy. Hannah Atkinson is there. And we all work together to try and just keep producing interesting content on social, and keep the brand going. And we've got lots of plans for it in the future. So there's more to come on WTF1. And then WTF Talent, we created, like I say, just over a year ago. And I was approached by Andrew Vanderberg, who's the founder of the race. We had a non-alcoholic beer together in Brewdog in London in January last year, when we were both detoxing after Christmas. And he said, I've got an idea to start a content creator agency that looks after creators in Formula One, because there really isn't anything like that. There's one or two similar-ish ones out there, but not really doing what we do. So he asked if I'd like to head it up, and I said yes. And then we spent a few weeks with a call to arms to see if there were any creators out there, to see if there was a market for this. And we got 400 or so people applied, and we selected about 8 or 9 initially who we liked, and they came on board as our founding roster. And over time that grew. I think we've got nearly 50 now, and we've expanded into lifestyle and travel and tech or whatever else, sports, entertainment, of course, Formula One still, and Formula E. And we've got creators from 5 continents and 12 countries, and we've delivered hundreds of individual brand campaigns for F1 sponsors all over the world, and it's been a great success.
So I spoke to Amber Jones the other day, but ahead of speaking to you, and I obviously asked her about WTF Talent and her involvement with that, and she said a really good thing. She said the best thing about being a part of it is that you put her in the room, and then it's down to her when she's in that room to work and network. Is that kind of what you were trying to do? Is she right in saying that?
Yeah, Amber's a good case study of that, because we lead the horse to water, and then go off and create. So we help with creatives and social ideas, but generally speaking, what we're there for is to make introductions and bring those people into the Formula One ecosystem, and then they can spread their wings from there. I mean, we every day, me and Luke Francis, who works on it with me, and Katie Chow over in the US, we speak all the time, and we're talking to brands and agencies nonstop. That's what we do, and we try and create commercial opportunities for these creators so that they can turn their hobby into a money making full-time gig. And some of them are like Amber, are brilliant at networking. So you can put them into an opportunity, like she says, and they'll just expand their wings from there, and we can keep chipping in with little opportunities here and there. Others, it's more full on, and we have to push people to do that networking piece, because it's not for everybody, but that's fine as well. And we just try and throw as much as we can at them, and if they want to do certain gigs, great. If they don't, no stress. But yeah, so far it's going really well.
And in your opinion, what does it take to be a successful content creator?
The big word that we always hear whenever we're at events or networking or speaking on panels or whatever it is, it's authenticity. You get caught out very quickly as a creator if you're not authentic, or if you try and sell your soul to the devil and just be brand, sell, make money, put any kind of brand message through your content. Just doesn't work. You have to be authentic and likable, and find a niche. All of it, we have loads of it, dozens and dozens of F1 content creators, but they're all different. Amber's very presenter led. James Coker is comedy. Rachel is travel. Nadia is lifestyle, but they all couple that with Formula One. So it's great when a brand comes in and gives you a brief and says, we're having, this party in New York, and it would suit, there'll be lots of model types there and lifestyle. We go, oh, great, cool. You're Jordan Rand. She's your person. She's a model. She wears leathers. She rides a motorbike. She's your girl. So, so that it's having a point of difference, and being authentic, I say, with two of the key things.
And you mentioned that big word there, networking, that word that just is all the advice you really ever get. How do you network and network well?
For me, it's quite easy, and it always has been. It's not, I don't think it's a rocket science. I think people overcomplicate it or put barriers up because they're nervous or scared or don't want to talk to people or don't like mingling in a room full of people who they perceive as bigger or better than them. For me, it's just about sending messages nonstop, phoning people nonstop, getting on websites and finding email addresses, going to events, and forcing yourself to walk up to someone you don't know and say hello. And the amount of times I've done that and something's come of it, it's very rare that I walk up to someone, say hello, and then go, I wish I hadn't done that. It turns into something always, even if it's just a connection that you make that will introduce you to somebody else that might be able to help you. But it's just getting up and doing it, and I appreciate it's not, it is difficult. It's not everybody is outgoing or confident. I wasn't. But I think you've just got to go for it, and find the phone numbers, find the email addresses, and just reach out to people, because on the whole, people are nice and are happy to help.
Definitely. I think I've definitely found that because I struggle with social anxiety. So the idea of me messaging someone and being like, hey, I think I'm really good. This is what I've done. Anything there for me? It's just quite challenging because you're like, what are they going to say? What are they going to think of me?
Yeah.
Have I said the right thing? Am I sending it at the right time? Have you got any advice for how to structure and craft a good message to start that networking process on something like LinkedIn, for example?
Well, I don't often go in with the hard sell. It's more of a, okay, so today, an hour before we recorded, the news came out that Hyundai were going into WEC. So, there's an opportunity. So to message someone from the Hyundai marketing team and say, wow, great news. Lovely to see you going into WEC. I'd love to chat to you about it. Sounds really interesting. And just leave it there. And once you've got them on the phone, you build rapport and you build a relationship, then you can go, by the way, we've got some content creators who would love to be in WEC, and then you're off. So I think it's just finding the right hook to get in there without being salesy, because nobody wants, I mean, the messages I get through LinkedIn saying, hey, we've got this great new platform that does this and automates that, and I just delete it straight away because I don't want to be sold at. so I think it's just about relationship building, finding a hook and a relevant and a reason to message someone or phone someone or email or whatever, and then build your relations from there. Going in cold with nothing is not a great route to success. But even for young people, if it's like, you know, I've had a lot of people message me like, I'm writing an article about something. I'd love your opinion. I'm like, great. I love giving opinions. Fine, let's have a chat. And then, they may drop in. Also, by the way, I'm looking for a job, or I'm doing, then the sales part comes. So I think as long as you can find a hook, there's always a way in. Always.
And you've worn many hats in motorsport now. Is there a role that has been your favourite?
Ooh, not the driver management, because it's very 24 hours. It's, you're not dealing with the drivers, you're dealing with the mums and dads. But I kind of like the sort of the era I'm in now, because I love the podcasting. I love working with the race, with Andrew Matt Vanderberg and Matt Whittam. They're very pioneering, entrepreneurial. I like the stage I'm at in my career. Like, after 20 years, I feel like I know pretty much what I'm talking about. And there's not many scenarios where I'm sort of stuck for words or stuck on a problem that I can't figure out or solve. I've made my mistakes, I've done my learning. And I enjoy going to events and being on panels and speaking at things and having, relatively high level conversations with people about the business of motorsport. So I think what I'm doing now is great, and having the freedom to do whatever I want. If I want to try and rent a yacht out to a brand in Monaco, I can do that. Or if I want to, do a bit of management, I can do that. Or if I want to do some sponsorship, I can do that. I feel like I'm in a nice place now.
You mentioned yachts in Monaco there, and I have a pitch for you right here, right
Oh,
now.
go
I
on.
am a massive fan of the TV series Below Deck,
Yeah.
which is all about yachting. Why have I not seen the iconic captains from that TV show in the Monaco paddock or on the yachts there? I really need to see it.
I don't know. I mean, I've never seen that program. I'm aware of it, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, you sort of think you would at some point.
It's the perfect crossover.
Oh, it totally is. I mean, I think there's something like 500 yachts that apply to get into the harbour. I think 200 and something get in, so they're probably just not quite there yet. But you never know. You might yet see them.
I need the day to come, and I'm hoping it's going to be you that's sorted it out.
You never know.
And I will take all of the credit if you ever
Fine.
do it.
The credit is all yours.
Thank you. So let's just talk a little bit about content one more time. You're obviously dealing with it constantly now, managing these content
Yeah.
creators, having them all kind of under your wings. What do you kind of see next? What's going to happen in the evolution of motorsport content creation industry?
I think a lot of that hinges on which race series are open to working with creators the most, because you probably saw recently Formula One did a bit of a clampdown with a load of cease and desist emails, which, to be honest, they were totally within their rights to do. People are using their IP and they're trying to stop it, and that's fine. The rules and regulations are very clear on that. I think they could open up Formula One a little bit more to creators. That they're not viewed in the same breath as journalists. And some race circuits are more open to them than others. The US races are pretty good. I mean, Austin last year, we had a whole load of creators in the paddock. And it was really funny. We were walking down the paddock, me and Andrew, with this sort of harem of creators around us, darting off into various motorhomes and teams and brands to do bits and pieces. So I'm hoping that the next few years we see motorsport and Formula One open up a little bit more to the idea of using creators. And I'm not talking like influencers necessarily like Taylor Swift or Will Smith. I'm talking like people who have got 500,000 followers on Instagram that love Formula One and are there at a Formula One race because they love it. And a lot of them are funding their own trips to these races. Like the Pit Lane twins are off to Singapore this weekend to go to the race. And Herlon, who we work with, who's in Brazil, funds his own way to 10 or 15 races a year. It'd be nice to get to a position where he doesn't have to fund himself, because we've got so much work that we can make sure he's paid to go. So I think I'd just like to see it all open up a little bit more for creators, maybe have, an accreditation process specifically for creators, and find a way to give them access to perhaps a little bit of Formula One content that at the moment is behind a very big paywall.
Is there any particular motorsport series at the minute which is really good at letting content creators in?
MotoGP is pretty good at the moment. That may change when Liberty have got their feet under the table. I don't know, but access there is good. Formula E has been probably the easiest for us. They've been great. So we had 3 creators contracted to Formula E all for for the whole of season 10, which was Olivia Hartley, James Coker, and Caroline. Was F1 Caroline, now Caroline's Corner. And they were with Formula E for the year, and they produced, I can't remember what the number was, a huge amount of content. I think 99 videos, several million views and impressions. Did really well. One of James's videos, one video alone on TikTok, did 10 million views. So for Formula E, that's been amazing. And they really understand the value of creators. So, perhaps Formula One could take a little bit of a leaf out of their book. I don't know. But yeah, they are very good with creators and have been fantastic to work with.
So we're coming to the end of our time together now. I would love to know, if you were to speak to your younger self now, what would you have to say to him?
I think I wouldn't have to say enjoy it, because I definitely did that. I don't know. I think I'd probably say appreciate the moment maybe a little bit more, because I think there are times when I was younger, when I was in certain scenarios in a paddock or whatever, where I should have just stepped back and gone, holy crap, like this is insanely cool. Um, what would I have changed? I'd have been more savvy with money. I was way too loose and reckless with cash, particularly when I started working for myself. Um, I would have got that in order earlier. Um, Other than that, I don't really know. I mean, I'd probably be more strategic about the whole thing. Especially my first 10 years, I sort of bumbled through it a little bit. It was all a bit fly by wire and just, grabbing whatever I could. I was just like, yes to everything. And I think I'd probably be a little bit more strategic, but I don't think I'd change too much. I learned an awful lot through mistakes in my early years, which I think have benefited me later on.
And finally, what advice would you offer to anyone who's kind of wanting to go into a career, even just a bit similar to yours?
I think try and have thick skin, and that's an easy thing to say. But Formula One motorsport it can be a very aggressive, fast-paced environment, and there are times where you need thick skin to get through it. I think being as nice as possible to people. From my perspective, I know there are a lot of people in Formula One who are very senior positions who might might be nice, but rule with an iron fist. I think Formula One is a very small place. If you want to work in motorsport, Formula One is a very small place. Motorsport is a small industry, really. And you've got to remember that the people that you deal with as you make your way through the sport are going to potentially be there for a very long time. And you want them to be people that you can call on later on, and you don't want to upset people along the way. You want to keep that network positive and growing. And I think that the case in point there is a lot of the people I worked with in 2005, who at the time were account executives, the very first step into the sport. Some of them are now very, very senior and are people who are, global heads of marketing or number 2 in a race series, or, top jobs. And we've kept in touch, and having those contacts now that I can ring up my friend and just say, hey, how's it going? Need to talk to you about something to do with Susie Wolf or Toto, or whatever it might be, is really valuable. So I think be good to people, treat other people well, because it will pay dividends further down the line.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for sharing your career so far with us, and we wish you all the best in the future. We will be back very, very soon with another career talk. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.